Hello and welcome to Lesson 12, Paper Prototyping. By the end of this lecture, you'll be able to build a paper prototype. In 2008, when I was first teaching this class, I was visiting some friends who were debating whether to buy a mirror of a certain size for their home or not. They had put some tape up, some painter's tape on the wall, but they weren't sure if the available sizes would work well with the room. And the problem with the tape is you couldn't really move it around. Being the enterprising HCI professor that I am, I leapt into action and started cutting cardboard in their hallway. And this was the result. Yes, this actually was put up, and I found out later they left it all the way to their Halloween party, much to my chagrin. But 10 minutes of prototyping with household objects, some cardboard, some aluminum foil, a little bit of tape, they were able to make a decision. They held up the mirror and they said, you know what, we can move it around. This is just, it's not the right size for this room. And they held off and they eventually got a different centerpiece. So, yeah, cardboard has power. Some considerations when you're paper prototyping is you want to consider the form factor. Is the prototype the right shape and size? If you're developing for a smartphone or a tablet, you want to make sure you actually, cut out in the right size so that it actually gives you an idea of how many things you could fit on that screen. If you're designing for a mobile form factor, but you make a big screen, you're not going to catch that you have limited screen real estate. This might be especially important if you're doing this for, say, an older phone that has an even smaller screen. Interactive elements. What can the user interact with? So you want to think about how you're going to be able to model the affordances of these low fidelity objects and how you might be able to actually make them so that you can manipulate them, which is where you start to think about materials. There are lots of ways of making things interactive. Transparent tape, transparent paper, literal scrolling. So you could have like maybe not a wheel, but like a long piece of paper that you then kind of scroll through. All of these things are super valuable in being able to help you create a paper prototype. And so it really pays to do your research online to figure out what kinds of things you can do for these paper prototypes. When you actually create your prototype, you then want to evaluate it or present it to a potential user. When you demonstrate it, what you do is you assign one person as the computer. They don't speak, they only actuate the prototype. They're kind of like the silent manipulator of the paper prototype. You then assign a different person as the facilitator to run the evaluation. If there's only one person, you want to make sure you kind of give out all the information up front, and then you are silent as you are manipulating the paper prototype. This doesn't give the illusion that it's a real system, but at least it's interacting with the system, and you're following the rules with the system. You're not giving them hints that might help them cheat when a user might not have that information. So being able to be quiet and just manipulate the system is really important for getting the most out of your paper prototype. The facilitator gives context and a clear task to the user. Obviously, if you just give an interface, people could play around with it. But if you want them to try and go through a use case, you need to give them a goal or a task to accomplish. And you may need to give some sort of context about what the app is, depending on your purposes. The user then interacts with the system and the system responds. So if they press a button, the screen might change. Or if they press an item in a drop-down menu, then that item might highlight in whatever manner you manage to make that work with your office supplies and your paper prototyping materials. Now it's your turn. We don't actually have a lecture activity for this lesson. Instead, this is just an introduction to assignment 3, where you're going to build a paper prototype yourself. Doing your research will really help you get inspired and see what you might be able to do with the materials and how you might construct it. When you do this, feel free to talk about high-level techniques and tricks with your classmates. Just post things to the Microsoft team, and that way we can all kind of share ideas of how you can make effective paper prototypes. When you make an effective paper prototype, it'll give you that expertise to be able to do this again later. Usually I find the second time or the third time you make these prototypes is when you start to get the hang of it. Since you're doing this in your project as well for milestone 2, you'll want to have this practice now to get ahead of it. More details on Learn. The emphasis on this assignment are to try and think of the design situation. You'll want to do things like sketches and storyboards maybe to try and make sure your design makes sense. So think through the design and be reflective on what you've done and what worked and what didn't work. The purpose of this assignment is to give you hands-on experience making a paper prototype that you then get to use in your project and in future endeavors. So make sure you plan, do, and then reflect upon what you've learned. That's it for this lecture. See you next time.